All right, traders, welcome to today's recap. This is Christian from Tribeca Trade Group, and today is Thursday, October 17th. We've got one more day before the weekend, and some more earnings reports coming out here after the close. ISRG, which looks like it's up pretty healthy. We'll talk about that one. We'll talk about where it went to, which I think is pretty uh, I say significant. Yeah, maybe. So I'll show that one in just a second. If I haven't mentioned it, everything that we're going over tonight, as always, is for information purposes only, not giving any advice or recommendations. So pretty interesting that I think this is the second day that this has happened, and this is what happens most days, but it's just been a little bit more noticeable. Is that we're really not moving much during the day. Uh, and again, it's good to recognize this. It's good to recognize what type of market you're in, and come up with a plan. Before you start the day, right? You don't want to be putting together your plan on what you're going to be doing in terms of taking risk, what you're going to be doing in terms of what you're trading. While the tape is moving, you want to think about these things when the market is closed and going into the day, whether or not you think it's a good day to add risk. All pre-planning, right? Because sometimes when the market starts to move, your pace picks up, your emotions run, a little bit more. But yeah, I mean, so I try to enact this as much as possible. I'll show you what I did for the day, but also we were talking about this, and this I think came out from Top Step Trader. Um, I've seen this before by Sentiment Trader as well. It's just good to visualize this, buying the close rather than trying to trade during the day. I've had fights with people before on Twitter about this because I think one time I tweeted this out and said, hey, this is an eye opener for day traders. And somebody was like, well, I never buy the open. Um, but people always think it's scary to hold positions overnight, but in fact, that's where the majority of the gains come from. You could scalp here and there, and especially if you find those names that are trending for the day. I think today, similar to a couple other days, we've found some names that are trending that seem to be. I'm not sure if it's new investment being put to work or if it's just names with high short interest. Like Stitch Fix has been a name that's been kind of running SFIX. Like Roku's been another name with a pretty decent high short interest that has been running the last couple of days. So there are names that are trending, but I think it's always important to kind of look at the S&P and say what kind of a day is it? Where is resistance? And I think that's what I was kind of talking about in the pre-market session to members that we do every day. But yeah, I mean, this should be eye-opening if you don't know about this. So buying the open, selling the close, what is this amounted to? Going all the way back to 93, not much. And again, you can try to say that, okay, if you're a strict day trader, that because I think if you're a pure day trader, you're not really holding positions overnight. But it's really hard, unless you're kind of waiting for those days where we open up down 0.5%, down 1%, and thinking that those are really good opportunities. The days where we have like this, where we basically start up 20 basis points or 30 basis points, end up being those days that are really good to kind of sell on the open. Right, and I try to put that into practice as much as possible. Again, just knowing where the alpha is in the market, I think, is always important, right? It just is what it is. It's counterintuitive. People think, oh, the market's going to open, and that's where that's where you can really make the money. It's actually in that overnight session. So yeah, I mean, I took a lot of, my first things that I do when we're up, it doesn't matter how much, 30 basis points, 50 basis points. Obviously, it would be better if we're up more than that when we start the day. But yeah, I mean, I got out of, I have pre-planned targets in some things, so that works pretty well. Got out of a lot of, I had a little XLI trade on. I ended up putting it back on once it dipped midday. And those are things that you can do, adjustments that you can do during the day. So it's not like there's nothing to do during the day, but it's a lot of sitting on, especially when I think that we're getting close to the top of the range. So let's back up, right? This is the 5 minute chart. Here's where we opened. Here's where we closed. We had some peaks and so forth. But again, really difficult. There's not much, like I would say, that is going to tell you that, like, here we're going to just stop and just go back the other way. I just don't think there's really that many signals out there. So let's look at the daily chart for a minute. So we're getting close, right? One thing that I see is that I've got this trend line that's drawn, right? And I think that I keep these trend lines present until we get out of the trend line. I had one here. I had some drawn in here that I've erased because we got out of this triangle of death back here. But notice that before we even get to the top of value, which I do think 3012, and I was on TD Ameritrade, I think on Monday, and I had mentioned this level. I said, hey, if we can get into value, which was here, we could possibly see a move all the way through value. We've had some difficulty again. I mean, it seems like the market is a little bit running out of steam. You kind of take note of where this happens, right? When we kind of touch levels and we can't get through them. So this was like, I wouldn't call this candle, but 1, 2, 3, 4. We couldn't get through here. Then we kind of returned to this area of the trend, upper end of the trend line, or sorry, not upper end, but the trend line again. 1, 2, this one didn't touch, but 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 days, we could not break this again. And we're starting to do another pattern. 1, 2, 3. So I don't know what's going to happen. I don't have a crystal ball, but to me it tells me that we're struggling with this level, and I see another level of resistance right above it. So is this the best place in the world to be adding risk? Depends on what your of course it depends on what your time frame is, and it depends on what your expectations are. I think I would rather have us have some exposure, which I've talked about in the last couple of days, not completely going 100% into cash, but just being mindful that you do have resistance to get through, and if we get through it, then we could maybe see. Then it could maybe get more exciting, and things sometimes once you pop out of a range and resistance, that can really draw people thinking that the market is breaking out, and that's kind of a signal. But we're not there yet, and for now, we don't know if we're going to see another one of these test, 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 fail. Test, 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 fail, and we're testing. So either we're going to zip out, and I've got some exposure for that in case that happens, or we're going to kind of muddle back in here. And the nice thing is there's support back here, and maybe that's a place to kind of think about adding a little bit more risk. But again, you frame it out and decide how much money you're going to put to work on days like this versus taking money off the table. Like, I continue to be a net seller. I'm trying to increase my cash balance as we get to that resistance, right? Again, I keep saying this, but it's all about risk to reward, where you think the best bang for your buck is going to be, and what the least path of resistance is going to be as well. All right, so I think that's, again, all things to kind of consider. This is all about strategy, right? It's much more important to, I think, go over that than individual names, right? I've been giving out, like, I've been sending out a couple of thoughts, like, on Twitter every couple of days, and it's difficult because you see, I do read the tape and call out option flow during the day, just like many other traders do, because I do think that you can get some good information from that. But I have a tough time with, chasing a name that's up 2 or 3% that sees option activity. I'm just not going to play that game. I don't think that, I think that there's a difference between saying, oh, wow, there's all this call activity and it's interesting, versus actually making money. I would rather make money rather than say, oh, look at, they're buying all these calls and all these things. But I think once you see call activity in a name that's already up 2 or 3%, what's your risk? Again, I'm using the same thing, but do you think the name's going to go up 5% or 6%? It could, but it could also just come right back down to being flat for the day. So, all things to kind of weigh, and all things that should be in your trading plan. So let's go ahead. I wanted to talk about, I mentioned a couple names. Well, I wanted to talk about the small caps because the small caps are doing something different, right? So sometimes I like to get the negative out of the way in the video. IWM is doing something different. It's kind of interesting here. This one, is moving, right? And if you look at the dated the beginning of the day action, of course, now I did not play this one, but this was a nice one, right? Maybe not not chasing up here, but kind of waiting till it comes in. And buying the open has been very difficult, but it looks like it worked in this situation if you kind of held through the day. So this was gave you a nice trending day. I was going to say range bound day, but that was the S&P. This had a nice trending day to it. And if you're holding a little bit of IWM calls, it's making its way at this point through value. So a little bit more bang for your buck, I think, in this versus the S&P chart. Qs Qs are pausing, same thing, right? They're at this one has actually gone through the top, and I think a lot of people are looking at that too. It's at the top of the range, so either it's going to continue on here, or it's going to kind of pull back. XLK kind of doing the same thing right here. So I mentioned a couple names. So again, that's kind of just the index picture. Not going to go over bonds. They were down again, 24 basis points. I usually like to put them into the video, but I've already gone on for 11 minutes. So interesting. I've been trying to really kind of educate people. So we use this indicator. It's called the market webs, right? If you're not familiar with it, so I can't tell you how to set your chart up like this. You actually have to purchase this from me. But it's, I can show you countless examples. Like ISRG goes right up to the virgin point of control and stops. We made some money today in Ulta trading. Again, I know where I want to get out of the position, and I said all along in our trade in Ulta, and I posted this on Twitter. I was like, I can't give you a better example of using a virgin point of control. So if you're not familiar with this concept, why does this happen? It's because there's if you look at the volume profile here in the shaded area, price often returns to areas where there was a high portion of volume before, and then it often, not every time, nothing is 100%, but it often takes out that level and then digests. Even though you could see there's not anything really telling you that there's a sell signal up here, but it's just where a lot of buyers and sellers have met. The same thing happened down here too. Now it went a little bit lower, but you could see it turned around. So they're really good places to kind of plan out where you think a name can get to. There was another name too. Roku, right? I don't think Roku took it out. But if you're like, geez, how much more could Roku get to? Well, I think it's probably going to get to this VPOC and probably stop from there after it's been on a huge run, right? It's going to seek this thing out. Interesting how wide the range is, but I think, and it is pretty close. So, being that this value area was so wide, it's probably a little bit less significance, but I mean, it looks like it's headed towards that, and I would personally be a seller at that. How much more do you think? How much more do you think it could go up from there? So, again, it continues to work, and the inventor of this indicator has over 1,200 lines of code in this thing to kind of do what it's doing for us. A couple other things just to mention, but I think that's enough points for today. What did trend? Obviously, IWM, which we talked about. Gold, silver, VIX. I guess there's no change on these from the open. Just to make sure my calculation works, but I guess it does. GDX. We did see some GDXJ calls today. I thought that was a pretty interesting trade, but that did also. This group has been pretty quiet. I did not go after this trade in GDXJ. I kind of set the alert here, but this rallied right again. I go back to the same thing: risk to reward setup. Usually, when a name starts below value, I think it's a good play to play this thing from here to basically bottom of value. It's a bigger thing for this thing to get all the way through. And I think just at that bottom of value. So again, if you saw options, you have to think about. Okay, it's interesting, right? We saw call options in GDXJ. How do I want to plan my trade around that? And I just chose not to. I think when that went up, It was around. I'm sorry, it may have been a little bit earlier than that. I think it was around. Let's see. Let's give you the exact. It was around 10 o'clock. So 9. Is that right? I'm on the 1 hour, right? So maybe right in here. So you could have made a little bit on it. Now I don't know what this is going to do next week. Or tomorrow. It is hesitating right at the bottom of value, but maybe something to watch for tomorrow because they did go pretty far out. This is May, so again, may not be the catalyst for tomorrow. Maybe a little bit further out. All right. Other areas that interesting. A couple things like the semiconductors gave back. They started the day up 1%. Basically, they finished flat. So they've been kind of maybe a little bit tired. It's also a bit of rotation, right? Sometimes certain groups carry the ball for a couple weeks, and then they kind of pass the ball off, right? And we call it a rotation. So some other areas like biotech has been doing very well the last couple days. Um, this also VPOC taken out. So again, probably a place to take targets. After a like 3 or 4 day swing at this point. But this group has been doing very well. UNH had some further movement. Actually, got over this VPOC. There's one here on the daily that also was taken out. Was it taken out? Almost. I don't know why. I think there's an issue here in Thinkorswim, but that's right at that. So I looked at UNH actually yesterday, and I was like, there's not enough for me to get. I guess $6 would have been fine today, in hindsight, but I decided against. I decided not to take it. Again, you can only play so many hands, right? Like a poker game, you can't play every single hand. You gotta, really pick and choose. And that's it. And again, you could see, that's why the S&P was kind of flat on the day. You've got some names that trended down for the day. Software again down for the second day in a row. I think you just have to kind of let all those downgrades. Remember, there was like 3 or 4 things negative that happened in software yesterday. Two big broker downgrades. What was it? ServiceNow, Adobe. Uh, there was also Workday, which their analyst day did not go well. There was also a couple other like price target decreases. Like I think Zen was another one. So there's been once you have like a number of things like that, you just kind of have to just take those names off your screen for a couple days and revisit when everybody forgets about them. But usually the day after something like that happens, they usually have some continuation to the downside. Also the defense names. All right, so that's basically it. Again, my trades for the day. Um, I did, again, make a sacrifice ATVI, which I think could run into that what Call of Duty number. I bailed on that trade. I hit a target on the open. I took a small trade in GT, so this is a pretty beaten up name. But again, kind of looking at what's going on with this name. Now, going back to what I said earlier in the video, it's already gone up decently. But if we look at the 1 hour, we've seen now call activity in GT a couple times. Sorry, let me zoom out here. But you can kind of see what I mean. You can see all these, so it depends. How much does this thing want to retrace? Well, it's back into resistance. There was a VPOC taken out today, but you got a series of them up here. So I don't know. It's worth maybe a small play, which is basically what I did. How much is this thing going to retrace after this big move? Maybe it gets back to the 200-day moving average, so maybe another buck before you hit that downtrend. This is this downtrend that this thing has been in. So maybe it stalls again at the 200-day moving average. So there's a little bit more money that you could possibly make. Here's the positioning in it today. And again, like I always say, you have to evaluate these things on your own because just because there's a call buyer on the tape, most of these, I don't want to say many, I think it's actually most of these expire worthless. So, you have to use your own intuition regarding these things. The other thing I was just going to point out, some interesting stuff. I put together, um, Where is this chart? I'm going to talk more about this. I'm not going to talk about this during this video. Whoops, where did it go? Maybe I won't be talking about it at all. ISRG. So EFA, right? I call it the international spy. I think this is pretty interesting here. It's, trying to get out of this, looks like an inverted head and shoulders today. This is a 5-year chart, so it's going to be a process. What I didn't like, and I like to be completely transparent, but look at this order that went up in VEA. It's funny because I get very, I guess, I don't know if people just don't understand. And if that's the case, please, email me. But look at this. This is what? 100 and, here, let me do the math because I forget. This was 13 million shares that went up. It's funny because nobody seems to care. Whoops. 13 million shares times 4171. That's a $542 million block trade. I don't hear anybody talking about that. So I don't know. This looks like a sell, by the way. When you see swept, and just like when people talk about option sweeps, it's the same thing. So this is what I used to do in my prior career: is make markets like this for hedge funds. So I would be on the end of the phone call, but you could see that they swept all the way down to this. So it looks like a sell. I didn't usually, they're rotating, right? They're taking money out of one thing and putting it into another. I didn't see where they went into, but it's pretty interesting as this group looks like it's trying to break out. Somebody's taking profits. And again, you can look at this chart, which I think looks compelling, but I don't know. Somebody's looks like they're taking money off the table. You could see the spike in volume, which is all one block trade. Again, $542 million. Nobody seems to really care. People are more focused on, $10,000 option sweeps. But it's significant. So I'll watch for the outflow. Usually this will be accompanied by an ETF outflow. Because what happens is, how does somebody facilitate that trade? $540 million. They're trading the underlying names in the basket. So keep in mind, any ETF, especially equity ETF, there's an underlying basket. And how a market maker will facilitate block trading in ETFs is they're trading the underlying basket. So what's in this thing? Nestle, Novartis, Toyota's in this thing. So the market makers have the ability to kind of send this, piece this order out to the overnight markets, and facilitate it that way. Again, larger conversation here, but I think really interesting. There's also a pretty big order in VWO where it looked like somebody was getting out of emerging markets too. So again, what do they know? Maybe they're just taking some profits and saying, "Hey, I want to get out of the market a little bit." But there was also a sizable trade that went up in the emerging markets ETF as well. All right, guys, I'll leave it there because it's a long video. Have a great night. See you tomorrow.